People swear this is the greatest game ever made, but how realistic is the electricity in Red Dead Redemption 2 really? Do those power lines actually run to somewhere that makes sense? Did Rockstar nail the Old West, or is it just a clever window dressing? Well, I really don't know, so let's figure out together. There are whole towns lit by utility poles, so I spent 20 plus hours scouring the internet and the game itself to see how power worked in 1899 and whether this Old West's replica holds up. There are a lot of things to see really. We're gonna dig into what kinds of light exist back then and how folks used them and what early electricity looked like and where, if anywhere, Rockstar slept up. The Rockstar's replica of the 1899 Old West is a place brimming with wildlife, framed by beautiful landscapes and driven by stories where you can witness the evolution of American capitalism in real time. Look toward the horizon and you'll spot gas lamps flickering through the swampy foggy. We also can see electric streetcars throwing sparks above the mud roads, weaving between horse and wagons. Factor smokestacks pumping thick and black clouds into Lemoy's state sky. It's a snapshot of the world where the Old West is dying and the modern era is being born. When Red Dead Redemption 2 dropped, most players are mesmerized by the scenery, the characters, and Rockstar's ridiculous eye for detail, but the studio's research went way beyond the obvious. They carefully rebuilt one of the most dramatic tech revolutions in human history. So let's start at the very source of all that power. When you round the industrial blocks of Saint Denis in Red Dead Redemption 2, that thick dark smoke hanging over the skyline isn't just there for mood. Rockstar didn't toss those clouds because they look dramatic, they are historically spot on. In 1899, coal was king. Pretty much every watt of electricity came for burning it. You can see coal everywhere. Throughout the missions and background sceneries inside the mines you can actually explore, like the one in Do Not Seek Absolution, where you lend Archidons a hand against some bully miners. Back in 1899, coal was absolutely crucial for making electricity. Everywhere power was generated mechanically. Steam engines burning coal chewed through resources on an unimaginable scale. A single generating plant, for instance, could swallow up to 25 tons of coal every single day. Inside Red Dead Redemption 2, those mountains of fuel roll in by rail, boxcars stuffed to the brim. As you can guess, the logistics behind all that were a straight up nightmare. Moving dozens of tons of coal around was anything but simple from a logistics standpoint. The structures and even some of the machinery from that era are recreated with real accuracy in Red Dead Redemption 2. So, up to this point, yeah, Red Dead nails it and shows the process perfectly. While the gang was off fighting in Guarma after yet another one of Dutch's disasters, a totally different battle was unfolding back in America, the War of the Currents. If you've never heard of it, the War of the Currents was huge for humanity and pitted two geniuses against each other, Thomas Edison, champion of direct current, and Nikola Tesla, master of alternating current. And as we all know today, the outcome of that war is crystal clear. Alternating current ended up winning by a wide margin, offering some very obvious benefits over direct current. The key advantage of AC was that you could step the voltage up or down, which meant you could send it long distances. DC, on the other hand, needed super thick cables and power stations basically every kilometer. AC could travel thousands of miles on comparatively thin wires. Before we even break down Red Dead Redemption 2's whole power line setup, yes, it's in the game, and I dug through all of it for you. Remember that Rockstar also gives a nod to Nikola Tesla. They do it with Marko Dragic, a brilliant, eccentric inventor who's basically Tesla dropped into the Wild West, a clear tribute to the real legend. Dragic's ending? Well, everyone knows it. Like plenty of geniuses back then, he winds up alone and pretty much forgotten. His secret lab tucked away in Roanoke Ridge. This mirrors the lives of many early electricity pioneers who worked cut off from the world. Even in that detail, Rockstar stays on point. Tesla himself often spent long nights solo in his New York lab, running experiments that outsiders thought were straight up bizarre. And yeah, the game captures that vibe perfectly. So do you guys remember that handheld electric lantern that Marko whips up for Arthur? That was legit tech in 1899. Portable electric lamps were a thing, but they cost a fortune, broke all the time, and ran off a brick-heavy battery. Even Marko's lab location is an exact stand-in for Wardenclyffe Tower, where Tesla ran his wild wireless power experiments. Jumping back to the topic of power lines, yes, long-distance transmission was possible in 1899, but it was nowhere near common back then. Red Dead Redemption 2 shows a pretty dense grid of poles and wires across the settled parts of the map. Shout out to a Russian channel that actually mapped every single pole. After lining that up with the history though, you can tell most of those lines are telegraph wires, one of the only ways people could keep in touch at the time. Picture this, power poles stretching from dusty tumbleweed clear across the map to Ansburg on the opposite coast. The game shows that hookup, but in real life 1899 almost nobody ran electricity over distances that crazy. The hardware did exist, but it was outrageously pricey and nowhere near nationwide. And there is one more hint. Back then, telegraph lines usually stuck to the railroad right-of-way so repair crews could roll up on a handcar when something broke. That's exactly how Red Dead lays it out, poles hugging the tracks and dotting just about every little settlement and the bigger cities like Saint-Denis. One really cool detail, whenever the line of poles hits a big bridge, Rockstar actually runs every single wire along the side of the span. It's kind of wild how much care they put in, climbing that bridge and threading the cables right along the railing. Seriously, the level of detail is nuts. And in some of the towns you can track the wire past the pole all the way to a house, where it slips in through a totally believable spot, like a window frame or some other little opening. Another cool touch, some of these wire runs dead end right where the road itself stops. A blink and you miss it detail that's honestly pretty impressive. When you roll into Saint Denis, the poles look totally different. Cables shoot off in every direction and the posts sport those blue glass insulators that were big in the States. You can still spot a few today. Rockstar even modeled every single strand. You can watch the wires wiggle in the breeze thanks to a bit of simple in-game physics. Here's where the story flips. The cables in St. Denis actually carry electricity. Since the city generates its own power locally, we'll dig into that in a sec, the grid is there just to move juice around town, not to ship it way out into the sticks. In the rural settlements, by contrast, those wooden poles are pretty much telegraph only. And we've got to talk about the streetcar in Red Dead Redemption 2. It's another electric ride built to shuttle folks all over St. Denis. To keep it running, the game gives it a full overhead power rig. Cables, poles, the whole deal, modeled down to the last bolt. Those wires trace the track from end to end, matching every bend with pinpoint accuracy. Keep an eye out, and you'll even catch little sparks popping off the line as the car clanks past. These streetcars became absolute must-haves once people saw how efficient they were. Their overhead poles even sport a bit of fancy trim and little rain shields to keep the hardware dry. St. Denis is easily the most modern spot in the entire map, laced with way more live wires than every other town combined. Some of those lines sag crazy close to second floor balconies where folks might step out for air. Electricity was a serious safety hazard back then. The wiring had almost zero insulation, and the whole setup was nowhere near as safe as what we've got today. Few other spots shine way brighter than you'd ever expect for 1899. The local market, for one, is draped in strings of incandescent filament bulbs that wash every stall in warm light. Total time period clash. The town cinema is lit up too, glowing like a beacon, and honestly looking gorgeous after dark. And get this, even the front facade of the game's own power company building is splashed in electric light. You're probably wondering why there's a giant cat and dog on screen right now. Yep, this is just us grabbing your attention so you'll smash that like button. By doing that, this just keeps these videos rolling out. Seriously, don't leave the cat and dog ticked off. Before we tackle that question, we need to see how folks lived outside St. Denis' bright glow. Way out in the countryside, far from the bustling cities, electricity barely touched daily life. In roads, for example, the only wires you spot are telegraph lines, and just a handful of buildings even look like they might be wired for power. On the farms, families kept big campfires burning to fight the nighttime chill, and the flames doubled as their main light source. When a bonfire wasn't enough, most homes leaned on kerosene lanterns or on gas lamps. If the family had a little more money to spare, in Red Dead Redemption 2, pretty much every farmhouse I wandered through uses a mix of candles and kerosene lanterns inside. Lanterns are everywhere outdoors too, hanging off porch beams, nailed to barn walls, lighting up corrals. That's a huge contrast to the mansions in St. Denis, where most of the big houses are clearly hooked right into the electric grid. Here's something funny. Farmers hated hanging kerosene lanterns in spots like the barn. One stray spark, and the whole hayloft could go up in flames. Plus, Every lantern kicked out a ton of heat, so come midsummer those big wooden farmhouses felt like saunas. On sweltering nights, families camped on the porch or lit only the bare minimum of lamps just to keep the place bearable. It's nice to remember, these folks had spent their whole lives using candles and oil lamps, so when electric lights finally crawled down the country roads, it freaked them out. That's no joke. Plenty of rural families swore that electricity was straight up witchcraft. For folks who had no clue what that invisible juice in the wires even was, all those poles and overhead cables looked downright menacing. Parties like the one St. Denis mayor throws for the gang were pure high society flexes. Row after row of bulbs blazing away, a rare sight back then, and a clear sign of money and power. Electricity was still a luxury most people couldn't touch, so showing it off was the ultimate status symbol. Back in Red Dead 2's time frame, nobody was shocked that lanterns and candles were a non-stop fire risk. Wooden walls plus open flame, that combo was sketchy at best. Folks stayed hyper alert for house fires. One bump to a table could knock over a lamp and turn the place into an inferno. One of the era's most infamous blazes comes from exactly that setup, the Great Chicago Fire of 1871. Legend says a cow kicked over a lantern in a barn and boom, the whole city went up. True or not, that story spread everywhere, capturing the very real fear that a tiny slip with lightning could spark a disaster. Do you know that long wagon runs after dark were just as dicey? That's why the period featured a special headlamp made specifically for wagons. Inside, a kerosene flame burned, while a set of mirrors bounced the light where the driver needed it. Super clever, and of course, Rockstar didn't miss it. Check the game closely and you'll spot that wagon lamp modeled down to the last hinge, faithful to the real 1890s design. Rockstar definitely did their homework. Another essential bit of gear back then was the miner's lamp hat. Yep, Arthur can pick one up, and it's perfect for lighting his way through dark tunnels. You'll spot plenty of NPCs sporting them too, keeping those pitch black shafts bright enough to work. Out in remote corners the law forgets, some folks just wave torches. Surprisingly reliable outdoors and way more common than you'd think. Trains needed dependable lights as well, so they could roll safely down the rails and spot trouble before it hit. The locomotive's headlight was basically a jumbo oil lantern with a couple of mirrors bolted inside to aim the beam straight ahead. So yeah, that huge light up front, it's really just a beefy kerosene lamp. By 1899, kerosene lanterns were getting phased out in passenger cars. Gas lighting had taken over. A small tank sat under each carriage, way easier to refill and a lot safer in a crash. Electricity was creeping into city homes and shops, but reliable wasn't the word for it. Bulbs were very clunky, so even wired houses kept oil lamps and candles around. The current flickered or flat out failed all the time. Blackouts were very common back then. Honestly, big cities still lose power now and then, so imagine it when everything was brand new. With so few light sources available, Rockstar's lighting artists had a real challenge. Make the world playable while staying true to history. Players have to see what's happening, especially in Red Dead Redemption 2. The clock never stops ticking, and the game cycles through all kinds of weather and times of day. That forced the art team to light up the night while still keeping every scene historically on point. Here's a tidbit. Kerosene lanterns needed a refill every 4 to 6 hours. In-game, I spotted nearly every classic light source of the era. Candles, kerosene lanterns, carbon arc lamps, and early incandescent bulbs, each one tied to where you are on the map. I even ran into a few sketchy bulbs filled with mildly radioactive stuff. I don't need to say that nobody in their right mind would use those today. Now that we've seen how folks live out in the country, we can dig into the city grids, St. Denis and Blackwater. After tailing the poles for what feels like forever, if you start way out on the edge and trace one line clear to the end, you'll find it stops right inside St. Denis. Blackwater's run is way shorter and a lot cleaner, but St. Denis is a whole other beast. Poles sprout on every block, wires running every which way. Still, if you're patient and follow each set of posts, you can track down the exact spots where every line finally taps out. Now, look at this. The poles really do hook up to an honest-to-goodness power source. Every line in RDR2 ends at this big electric company right here. You can see the whole tangle of wires running straight into the building with no loose ends. So anytime you spot a pole in the game, know it actually links back to a place that makes sense, a generator station. Like we said at the start, it's almost certainly a coal-fired plant. Big engines burning coal to crank out electricity. So, we got a confirmation. Hats off to Rockstar for wiring every cable in Red Dead Redemption 2 to a real power hub. Honestly, we could spend all day chasing little details, wires diving into houses, poles tucked behind rooftops. In Blackwater, for example, right by the sheriff's office, you can watch a line snake perfectly into the building, and that's just one of the countless jaw-dropping touches scattered across the map. Most of the lights in this game are actually breakable. Some just fizzle out, others shatter the glass so you can still see the flame dancing inside. Look up and you'll spot tiny transformers and junction boxes, plus those classic blue glass insulators. Everything modeled down to the last bolt. Remember, this game came out in 2018. The sheer amount of nuts and bolts detail Rockstar stuffed in is insane. If you like this deep dive, do me a favor. Hit like and subscribe so we can smash that 1,000 sub goal. Thanks for watching, bye bye.